You know, since I started Project Past, I've had the opportunity to take you along with me to battlefields, museums, little-known historic sites, monuments in the middle of the woods, and I have learned a ton, and I hope you've learned a thing or two as well. But I'm taking this Project Past circus on the road, and we're going to be exploring a few Civil War battlefields in its Western theater. And I've never done that before, so I'm happy to have you along with me. I couldn't think of a better place to start than right here in Franklin, Tennessee. Now, before we walk in the footsteps of the Confederate forces as they would launch their attack, just over here at the Carnton Plantation, how did both armies meet at this small town of Franklin, Tennessee? Well, following the fall of Atlanta on September 1st of 1864, John Bell Hood and about 30,000 Confederates of the Army of Tennessee would launch an assault into Tennessee, hoping to draw Sherman's attention from Georgia back into Tennessee. Well, Sherman didn't take the bait. Instead, he dispatched Major General John Schofield and about 30,000 Union troops of the Army of the Ohio to head into Tennessee and in an attempt to secure Nashville. That was Hood's goal. He wanted to take back Nashville, which was a vital supply hub for the Union forces. Well, following the Battle of SpringHill, Hood had an opportunity to prevent Schofield's Union troops from moving on to Nashville. And in the dead of night, Schofield's army slipped away from Hood, and they would come back here to Franklin, Tennessee. Hood would pursue them, and on November 30th of 1864, one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War would take place here in Franklin, Tennessee. A Confederate charge that makes Pickett's charge look like nothing. And I can't wait to share this site with you. They have done incredible work, not only preserving what they have, but reclaiming back grounds that they've lost in previous generations. So let's see what we can learn about the Battle of Franklin here today. So we are currently at a location called Eastern Flank Battlefield Park, and we are on the extreme right flank of what would have been the Confederate line. Now, the Confederate line stretched for about 2 miles in this direction, all along the town of Franklin here. And at about 4 p.m. on November 30th of 1864, nearly 20,000 Confederates would begin to emerge from these wood lines and begin their assault against the Union positions. Now, our current location saw a Confederate division under the command of Major General William Loring and about 3,500 Confederates. They would emerge from this woodline here before us, and they'd begin marching from this location here, and they would march through what was called the Carnton Plantation. And to the left of William Loring's division, you would have Major General Edward Walthall's division of about 2,500 Confederates. So just in this area alone, we had over 6,000 Confederate troops emerging from these woodlines here. And they'd begin their assault, like we just said, about 4 p.m., marching in this direction through the Carnton Plantation. And as soon as the Confederate forces would leave the cover of the woodline here, they begin receiving artillery fire from numerous Union batteries in and around the town of Franklin. Now, the Confederates only had one battery available at this point in the battle to counter all the Union batteries. Now, you just heard me mention the Carnton House. Well, that's exactly what you're looking at here. Obviously, it still stands here today, and this was once the Carnton Plantation. Now, immediately after the Confederate forces would emerge from the woodline, just over this way, where we started the video, they'd begin receiving artillery fire, marching through this way, and this house would begin quickly filling with Confederate casualties. And at the height of the battle, it had a couple hundred casualties on the floors of the Carnton House. Now, due to time constraints, I can't take the full tour of the Carnton House. However, the staff here was kind enough to let me pop my head in and snap an image between tours here. Now, what you're seeing is actual bloodstains on the floor from Confederate casualties during the Battle of Franklin, November 30th of 1864. And I was only in there for about 30 seconds, but man, that moment gave me the chills. So again, here is the Carnton Plantation, and the Confederate troops would be marching in this direction here. And it's a little windy here, so I'm hoping the audio is coming out. But we're going to march in the footsteps of Major General William Loring's division and try and get a little sense of what they experienced before they assaulted the Union works. Now, I want to say Franklin is about a half mile to a mile in this direction, maybe a little under a mile.
And as you can see, just like at Pickett's charge, the Confederates would have had to advance across a vast open field, at least here on the eastern flank, or what would be the right flank of the Confederate Army. So remember, you had numerous Union batteries in and around Franklin just hammering the Confederates as they crossed this vast open field here.
So we are making our way across the very field that Loring's division and many other Confederate divisions to my right began advancing across. Franklin is in this direction where the Union defenses are. We're under artillery fire. Fort Granger just over my left shoulder, and then you have numerous Union batteries all along their defenses surrounding Franklin. Something to remember, it's late in the war. These artillery crews not only know how to load their gun in a fast and efficient manner, they know how to sight their guns in. And as soon as the Confederates emerge from the wood line behind you on the camera here, first Union shell hit in front of their formations. Second Union shell hit behind them. The third Union shell burst above the Confederate ranks, raining down hot lead and shrapnel. And there began the Battle of Franklin, and the Carnton Plantation was quickly filling with Confederate casualties. Remember, we're marching in our linear formations. That's the military doctrine of the time. It may not make sense to us today, but this is how you could move a large force rather effectively when communication was so hard. We're marching in our linear formations. Guy next to you, shrapnel, he's no longer next to you. You keep pushing. Maybe your adrenaline's pumping a little more. We're starting to go a little faster and a little faster. And we still have 3/4 to half a mile to go before we even reach the Union works here. We're marching across a wide open field. Remember, we kind of walked in the footsteps of Pickett's charge, and we saw just how devastating Union artillery was with these large formations walking across a wide open field. And these fields aren't perfectly flat. So every now and then you do get some cover, but not from the Union batteries at Fort Granger and surrounding Franklin. So let's continue our march here. So I just wanted to give you a first-hand perspective of the field we're marching across. And I'm going to stop narrating here, and then we can just take in this site and maybe use our imagination to see what the Confederate forces are experiencing. Fort Granger is in that direction. Franklin is in this direction, and the Union has fortifications kind of in a horseshoe around the town of Franklin. And they're about 3/4 to a half mile away from this location. So let's continue our march. So we've made it pretty much across the field here, and what you're seeing before us is a cemetery that has a large contingent of Confederate soldiers buried here. Now, I believe they were all re-exhumed and placed here probably about a year after the battle took place. So the CEO of the Battle of Franklin Trust, Eric Jacobson, was giving a video tour of this location. It's available on YouTube at the Battle of Franklin Trust YouTube page. That link is in the description below. But when he came to this point, remember, this graveyard was not here during the time of the battle. When he came to this point, he said something that really stuck with me and that really gave me the chills. He said, Loring's division, many of those soldiers were literally walking over their own graves, and they just didn't know it yet. And man, if that doesn't put the carnage and chaos of the Civil War in perspective, I don't know what does. These men were launching their assault from that wood line behind you on the camera here. They were coming right through this area. This graveyard was not here, but a year later, many of them, Mississippians, would be buried in this graveyard right here. Another testament just how awful war is, especially civil wars. And as we're learning, civil wars aren't so civil. So those were just some of the actions here at Eastern Flank Field. It's important to remember that the attack was unfolding all around the town of Franklin, not just at this location. But I wanted to show you this location so you had a kind of some perspective of where the Confederates were attacking from and what they were experiencing before they reached the Union lines. Now we're going to head on over to the center of the Union line and learn about what happened there, because although this plan may seem a little crazy to us now, it almost paid off for Hood and the Confederates.
So we are now at what was the center of the Union line, and if you're still a little confused as to where we are, here are some of the buildings that make up the Carter House. Now the Carter House found itself at the center of some pretty brutal fighting here at the Battle of Franklin. Again, we are in the center of the Union line, so you had Union fortifications just in front of the Carter House here, right over here in this location by that modern day structure. So before we explore this battle from the Union perspective, we're going to hop on over and see what this battle looked like from the Confederate perspective first, and continue our attack like we did on the eastern flank. So if you ever visit the Franklin battlefield, you're going to see what looks like a rock path. Although it looks like a path, it is not. It is actually marking the location of the Union lines here at Franklin. Now this offers an amazing visual, and you can really picture the battle because you can see where the Union units actually were. Now, one thing you'll notice is if you look this way here is the Columbia Pike. The line doesn't stretch across the road, and this road was actually here during the time of the battle. So the Union has lines on the other side of the road there, and it created a natural gap because they didn't want to plug up this road. Now, this is the very road that they took from SpringHill, I believe. Just giving you one more look at the Union line here, and you can kind of see it wraps this way, kind of cuts back this way, and you can really get a sense of how the line kind of follows the features of the terrain here, which is always neat to see. So this is the Columbia Pike, and we are currently looking south. Now this is significant because this is where the Confederates would have been attacking from. Now this is also where Brigadier General George Wagner would have placed 2 of his 3 brigades in his division in an advanced position. Now this seems kind of silly, but I promise that there was a purpose. Now you can kind of see the terrain isn't flat. So Wagner would place his men in an advanced position in order to keep tabs on the Confederates. Now I've read anywhere between 200 to 500 yards that these advanced troops would have been placed. Now unfortunately for the Union troops here, they were heavily outnumbered. They only numbered around 3,000, and remember we touched on nearly 20,000 Confederates made this charge. So when the Confederates would emerge, they would only get a volley or 2 off before they were essentially overrun. Now, another problem was created by this. When the Confederates overran this position, many of the Union troops were running back towards their main lines surrounding Franklin. Well, the troops that remained at the main lines around Franklin couldn't fire because the Confederates were using these Union troops as a shield. Confederate troops were even yelling, "Follow them into the works." So you can imagine being a Union soldier on the main line here, holding your fire, not wanting to hit your friends, but eventually these Union troops had to make the decision to start firing because they were in danger of being overrun themselves. So that is quite the predicament to be in, and there's no doubt that friendly fire occurred at this point in the battle. Now the Confederates would take nearly 700 Union prisoners from Wagner's division. So now we move down the line a little bit, and we are facing the Union line, and that Union line runs all along where those trees are there. There's the Columbia Pike, and that's where we just were looking south. Now the Confederates would have been attacking from this direction here. Now there's modern day structures here, so we got to use our imaginations a little bit. And we're standing on the general area where Major General Patrick Cleburne's division would have been advancing through. Now he was tasked with assaulting the Union positions east of the Columbia Pike, and you had Major General John C. Brown's division on this side west of the Columbia Pike, and they were sweeping in this direction here. So we are still east of the Columbia Pike, and this is where nearly 3,000 Confederate soldiers under the command of Patrick Cleburne would have been advancing through and getting ready to punch through the Union line here. Now we are not very far from the Union line, maybe 75, 50 yards, somewhere in that location. And you got 2 artillery pieces right here. So you can just imagine the air just thick with lead in this location. Now Cleburne himself would have a horse shot out from under him as he was leading this attack, about 80 yards from the Union works. And Mississippi Courier would dismount and hand the reins to Cleburne, and before Cleburne could mount the second horse, that horse was killed. So then Cleburne decided to continue the advance on foot, as if he was a regimental commander. Cleburne would advance within 50 feet of the Union works here, and he would be found killed with a mini-ball wound to the chest just below his heart. A captain by the name of C.W. Frazier would remark, "He, General Cleburne, sought out our regiment, charged in with it, and died with it. He could have selected no better place." So we moved closer to the Union line now. We were just over there talking about Patrick Cleburne, and his men would have been advancing across this field into just a hellacious crossfire. You had Union infantry regiments all along this wall here. I believe the 100th Ohio was just to my left. So Cleburne's men would have been advancing just before us here. You can just imagine you have thousands and thousands of Confederate soldiers. I believe between the two divisions assaulting here, there were almost 8,000 soldiers. And here's the Union line here. So I'm standing next to the 6th Ohio battery, or section I should say. They only had 2 guns right here. And to my right you had the 100th Ohio. And remember, to their right you have the Columbia Pike, which was left open here. So they were about to be outflanked. So we are currently standing at a 2-gun section of the 6th Ohio Artillery. And these guns were firing point blank. You had Francis Cockrell's Missouri Brigade just straight ahead where I pointed, and they were just being hit point blank by these 2 guns here. Now, these 2 12-pound Napoleons were under the command of Aaron Baldwin, and these 2 guns fired nearly 600 rounds throughout the Battle of Franklin here. And there are even some accounts that they were firing triple canister point blank into the Confederate lines. Some soldiers recalled you can hear the roar of the guns, followed by the crushing and snapping of the Confederate soldiers' bones because they were so close to the cannons here. I can't begin to imagine that level of carnage. Now, despite the Confederates breaching the Union line just to our right, these 2 guns of the 6th Ohio held their ground and continued throwing lead into the Confederate ranks here. My hat's off to these 2 crews because they could have easily fled with their flank being exposed, but they held their ground right here. Now, before we move on, I want to explain why the Union line was shaped the way it was in this area. Well, it was because of a cotton gin, and that cotton gin was discovered during a recent archaeology project several years ago. And it kind of filled in a few gaps that were missing here because they didn't really know why the batteries were placed where they were. And as you can see, they unearthed the foundation, which kind of explained why the Union line kind of protruded out a little bit. You obviously didn't want this giant cotton gin in front of your guns obstructing their fields of fire. Man, what an unbelievable find by the staff here. So we've moved closer to the Columbia Pike, and we are at where the 1st Kentucky would have a battery here. Now, they would be manning 4 3-inch rifled cannons right at this location, and these cannons would be briefly captured when the Confederates would breach the line. And I'm just giving you a quick look at what this gun would fire. This is a canister shot. This is one of the many munitions that it could fire. And right here is the 1st Kentucky battery. Now, something that I want to show you is these guns are facing a different direction than the guns of the 6th Ohio, just to our left. These guns are facing, I believe, in the southwest. So, as you can see, these guns covered a vastly different area than the 2 guns of the 6th Ohio. So you can see how you have overlapping fields of fire here and just how devastating the Union artillery was here. I believe almost 3,000 artillery rounds were fired from the Union batteries on the Confederate forces here. So let's continue our journey and head west of the Columbia Pike here. So now we are west of the Columbia Pike, and we are right where the 50th Ohio and the 72nd Illinois would bear the brunt of the Confederate assault here, and they would breach this line about 50 yards. Now you have this modern day structure here, and as you can see just to the left you have your Union line, and that line runs along this direction, kind of cuts back a little bit, and continues here. Now, the 50th Ohio would suffer 50% casualties within a few minutes here, so they'd be pushed back. Elements of the 72nd Illinois would push back to that secondary line that you can see in the distance there. You have one of the many structures of the Carnton Plantation here, so just to the left of that structure you have 2 artillery pieces. But just imagine you're a Confederate soldier. You just breached the line here, and we're getting ready to overtake the Union center. And as we're coming closer to the secondary Union line here, there is a surprise for us, and that's 2 guns. 20th Ohio, and supporting the 20th Ohio is an infantry regiment right there called the 44th Missouri Infantry.
All right, so we've covered this battle from the Confederate perspective. We're going to start covering it from the Union perspective on the west side of the Columbia Pike here. And I want to show you just how deadly Civil War combat truly was, especially for the civilians caught in the middle. So the Union line is just before us, right in this region, right in front of that modern day structure, and the Confederates were attacking from beyond that way. So a lot of these holes are mini ball holes, shrapnel from artillery, and you can just see how devastating the fire was here at times. And it's interesting to me, you know, thinking about every single one of these marks either came from a soldier or an artillery piece, and those artillery pieces and their crews had their own story. The individual soldiers firing these mini balls had their own stories. So this is just a snapshot of the devastation of the Civil War here. Gosh, it's just crazy. Here's my hand here for reference to some of these holes. And making our way towards the Carter house here. On the outside you can see a lot more bullet strikes. Now there are strikes on the other side as well. Some of these bullets passed right through the structure. Some were from the Union, who were pushed back in this direction, and they were making their way back through this area here. Man, that is impressive, horrifying, and I'm happy I can share it with you.
So now we are standing by the 20th Ohio Battery, and next to the 20th Ohio is an infantry regiment called the 44th Missouri Infantry. Now, in my opinion, this infantry regiment doesn't get enough credit for what they did here at Franklin. They were a green regiment with no experience, and they were thrust into one of the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War, and they held their ground. And in my opinion, it was because of them that Emerson Updycke, who was stationed behind our location, was able to bring up his men and plug this Union gap that was created right in this area. The Confederates came pouring through, and this secondary line held, and it held long enough for the Union to bring up reinforcements. But here is the 20th Ohio Battery, and I believe they fired almost 200 rounds into the Confederate forces here. Now, what you're seeing is a recreated earthwork, but it is showing where the 44th Missouri was at the time of the Confederate breach here. Now, you just heard me mention Emerson Updycke. Well, his brigade was located about 200 yards north of the Carter House, held in reserve, and he was actually part of Wagner's division. However, his men were sent to the rear because they were on skirmish duty all night. And upon the 44th Missouri buying the Union forces time, Emerson Updycke rallied his brigade, and his brigade came surging through this area here, beginning to drive back the Confederate forces back through these artillery pieces and into the field before us here. And in this field that we're looking at here, it is described as a deadly vortex of hand-to-hand combat. Now, one of the regiments in Updycke's brigade that was involved in this vortex of combat was the 24th Wisconsin, and leading the 24th Wisconsin was a 19-year-old man by the name of Arthur MacArthur. Now, MacArthur would lead his men on horseback until that horse was shot off from under him. MacArthur would rise to his feet, and then a bullet would tear open his left shoulder. MacArthur still continued spotting a rebel flag. He would be shot in the chest by a Confederate officer, but before falling, MacArthur thrust his saber into the Confederate officer's chest. Now, before that Confederate officer fell, that Confederate officer shot MacArthur in the knee. Now, MacArthur would go on to survive the war, and would become Lieutenant General of the United States Army, along with winning the Medal of Honor. He would also be the father of the famed American World War II legend, Douglas MacArthur. How cool is that?
You know, we saw firsthand what Civil War munitions and small arms can do to structures right over here with the Carter House. But imagine hand-to-hand combat. This doesn't mean you're in a fist fight with an adversary, you knock them down and then you guys go your separate ways. They're using bricks, rocks, shovels, knives, bayonets, butt ends of rifles. Emerson Updycke led his brigade into this area, emptied his service revolver, turned that service revolver around, and bashed a Confederate officer over the head with it, killing him. I mean, this is savage fighting, and things that the survivors here are going to have to live with the rest of their lives. I mean, just on these fields behind us here, again, hand-to-hand combat, that is a lot more than you and I can ever imagine.
So I've worked my way back to the first Union line now. Now this is where the Confederates would initially breach the line. Now they would be pushed back to this line here, and they would use this line to their advantage. They'd seek refuge on the other side of this line here by this telephone pole. And the reason why I want to share this spot with you is because this is the general area where General Arthur Strahl would be taking up refuge right alongside his soldiers here. Now there's numerous reports of the bodies just stacked on top of each other here. And the other side of the Union works was offering a little bit of refuge for the Confederate soldiers here. Now, a sergeant major within Strahl's brigade, and I believe he was in the 19th Tennessee, he was shot 16 times in this general area. It's just, the carnage that was unfolding here was just unbelievable to me. Well, Arthur Strahl was taking up refuge on the other side of the works here. Now, he was right in this general area, and he was loading muskets for his troops. Now, he would load a musket, hand it to a soldier, and he would boost that soldier up over the works. Well, the first time he tried this, the soldier popped his head up over the works, and that soldier was killed. Well, Arthur Strahl loaded another musket and handed it to a soldier, boosted him up, and now that soldier was killed. Tom Alexander of Company H would be the third soldier to approach Strahl. He would say, "General, help me up." Strahl would reply, "No, I have helped my last man up on the works to be shot in my hands." Now, shortly after this exchange, Strahl would be shot, I believe either in the head or neck. Either way, he wouldn't be killed instantly. He would find his second in command, transfer command to him, and as Strahl was being evacuated, he would be hit an additional time, which would end up killing him. Now, Arthur Strahl was one of 6 Confederate generals who would end up being killed here at the Battle of Franklin, right here in this general area. Now, unfortunately, I do have one more tragic story to share with you that happened right here in this general area. This is Captain Todd Carter of Company H of the 20th Tennessee Infantry, and he was born and raised right here in Franklin, right here at the Carter House. The battle was literally unfolding at the doorsteps of his family's home, so you can just imagine what was going through Todd Carter's mind, especially since he probably hasn't been home since he enlisted in the infantry. Now, Todd Carter was a staff officer, which means he didn't have to fight in this battle. He chose to fight in this battle. And he mounted a horse, and he said, "Follow me, boys. I'm almost home." As Todd Carter was making the charge, he and his horse were shot numerous times. On December 1st, Carter's body was found laying unconscious and wounded on the battlefield. He was carried home by Dr. Deering Roberts, who was a 20th Tennessee staff surgeon. Unfortunately for Todd Carter and the Carter family, Todd would die of his wounds on December 2nd. He would die directly across from the very room that he was born in.
This is why I just absolutely love history, especially military history. I'm literally walking on the very same ground where Douglas MacArthur's father fought on. I mean, it's incredible. He was wounded several times just on these grounds before us here. And, you know, he would survive the war and give birth to the World War II legend, Douglas MacArthur. I mean, you can't beat history. By coming to these battlefields, you learn these stories, and this is why I'm doing this. And I hope that you're enjoying this one, because although a lot of this battlefield has been lost, they are retaking plots of land little by little. Franklin Battlefield is a must-see and rivals any other battlefield that I've ever been to.